obviously, if we have an incident commander, a lot of times what we want to do is we want to go ahead and look at the staff, command and general staff, and see who's there. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start this section. We're going to break it up and have some of the other instructors talk about the different command and general staff positions that exist. And so let's kind of take a look and see why we would need these people and what they would do for us. Obviously, all these different positions you see are members of the command and general staff, and I'm going to make the assumption most of you have been through at least 100 and 200. Maybe you've even been through 300 and 400 and actually get a chance to see where some of these positions play in, and why would we use them? What role would they have for us on the scene? But I will tell you this: the challenge for the incident command system, the real challenge is that you have to figure out a way to bring these people in to your daily operations. And once you bring them into your daily operations and then you expand beyond those daily operations, the roles that these people play will support your operation and do it in a much better fashion for you. So I'll give you a perfect example of this. When I was fire chief and we would roll up on an incident when there was a structure fire, one of the first things I always looked to do was to put an operations section chief in there. And that operations section chief might do things for me, like they might control interior operations, and they might control actual search. They may have the ability to implement a rescue, or, you know, God forbid, if you got some kind of a situation where you get a firefighter down. But that was always what the operations section chief did for me. And that gave me a chance to kind of step back out, get closer to the engine, and get more of a 180-degree view at the scene. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, when you go to this scene and you start making decisions, your ability to see the whole picture starts to drop very dramatically. And so one of the things that you want to be able to do is figure out a way to actually implement some of these different positions so that they can give you a chance to kind of step back and see what's going on. On larger incidents, you really need to be able to step back and see what's going on. But that's kind of what these people do for you. One of the first ICS classes I ever took was put on by a gentleman who came. Everybody's got their own way of teaching ICS, and this was back in the late 80s when this gentleman did this. But he brought in these 2 garbage bags, and you thought, what's this guy going to do? And he would pull these poor students out of class, and he would put them up there in front. And he had these, they were like stuffed monkeys that grabbed on, that kind of had held on. And they had things on their back like operations and tasks that they would do. And he would get this poor person up there. In the class I was in, it was this poor little lady. And he brought her up there and he said, what are you going to do about rescue? Are you going to handle that? And so he gave her that one. And by the time she was done, she looked like a big ball of fur. And he said to her, what can you do? And she said, I can delegate some of these tasks. I can have other people help me do these tasks. And so they brought people up and started handing some of these things off. But really, that's what you're trying to do at the scene, is you're trying to delegate some of these responsibilities to other people as the incident commander, so they can kind of help you to make better decisions, because you don't have to handle everything that's going on. We don't think of a planning section chief at smaller incidents, but in reality, when we're looking ahead and we're trying to put things in perspective, that's one of those people that we really want to have at the scene. Okay, so how do we use these people, and what value do they have? Andy Goodall is going to talk to you about operations, and I will turn it over to him.
So we're going to talk about the operations section chief duties, what the duties this person holds. So the operations section chief advises of tactical components. So what this is that you're the commander of the tactics side of this operation in the event. So what we want to do then is have a plan in place that is easily managed and easily understood by all the people involved. So this is your task. This is your stuff that your tactics that you got to get done. And this is, not the incident commander who's overseeing the overall incident, but somebody who's worried about the most important task at hand, and that's what we want to focus our energy on as this sections chief. He also may manage divisions, groups, and branches. So if you're going to manage a division, usually they're divided into an incident geographically. So as a division, we think of that as a geographical designation to be able to control an incident, say as an area command kind of a thing. Groups are used to describe functional. So if we're going to talk about groups, this is a specific function such as water supply. That would be as an example of what we would use a group for on a functional basis. And then branches are used when the number of divisions or groups extended beyond the command span of control, can be either functional or geographical. So that's how we kind of break down our divisions, groups, and branches to a span of control where they can be easily managed. And the operations section chief is going to direct the resources as needed to help manage the incident. Again, they're going to be, the major task at hand, whether it be rescue, maybe an operations section chief or whatever it may be. So we're going to try and direct those resources and be in charge of making sure that they're managed and put into the incident to our best manner and able to be used accordingly. He also may order additional resources through command. So if you see that you're in the middle of an incident and you're whatever section you're in charge of, and you understand, hey, you know what, this isn't working for me, I need more resources, whatever it may be to complete your task, you may order additional resources through command or logistics, depending upon how your incident's set up. So you're also there to oversee and determine if more resources are needed to be able to get your task accomplished. So again, in smaller incidents, the operations section chief may direct interior operations such as rescue, extinguishment, or overhaul. So they may break down interiorly as specific duties such as this. On some of the smaller incidents, and like I said, a single structure fire for an operations sections chief, you may have to do a couple of different things at one time, depending upon what resources or command level staff you have available to be able to complete the task for this incident. An incident dictates if you're going to even get down to a level for an operations section chief. It's important to remember that operations chiefs reducing the commander's workload to allow him the incident commander to step back and do the overall view. So if you're, an operations sections chief and you're working a structure fire, you may be working on fire suppression. That may be your goal. So that gives the commander be able to do the overall view of the whole incident as far as, hey, do I need water supply? Do I need an ambulance for people who may be injured? Do I need resources? Do I need to worry about additional personnel if it's cold weather to be able to release give them a chance to relieve and warm up, or if it's hot weather to send them through rehab and make sure they're taken care of properly so we don't injure any of our firefighters. So that task level work, the operations section chief that may complete it will allow the incident commander a chance to look at the overall big picture and do what he's got to do to manage the overall incident. Of course, there may be this operations section chief may be added if the accountability issues or delegation of duties should arise. So again, accountability is important. It's not the operations section chief designation to know every single person, but if you've got a commander of a couple of different groups and you rely on your your east side command group or your fast attack group or however you want to alert them, designate those, you may want to say, all right, I know that I've got 3 groups working and it's that commander's group to say, hey, I've got 4 people with me. So that's how you can kind of manage your personnel on some of that level, but it's best overall if you can get an accountability person to be able to try and manage that whole incident. But sometimes it just doesn't work that way with the manpower and resources, that are available, especially with some of these small and rural departments. It just gets real tough to be able to break down the roles as far as some of the larger cities can do because just of manpower issues. So next thing up is the planning sections chief. We're going to let Greg Nimmo is going to talk about a couple of those, and we're going to get through this here pretty quickly.
All right, we're going to go into planning section a little bit. This is talking about some ICS positions specific. And just to kind of talk about that a little bit more, a lot of times I end up in the planning section on what we're doing. I've done that on state level responses, local responses, regional responses. So this is something that I kind of have a big heart for. A lot of times I work with logistics stuff too, but planning is really the main thing. So in the planning section chief position, you really have two main duties in the ICS system, and that's to allow incident commander to focus on the response of what's going on right now. And the planning section chief is kind of the crystal ball guy, not only looking at what's happening right now, but looking to future operational periods, looking to the future, trying to keep that perspective. I understand as command, when you're on the ground making decisions with the operations section in a larger type response, and you're dealing with things, you're focused, you're tunnel vision, you're stuck in there. You're trying to keep that big perspective of the train car, the whole train car review, looking from the engine to the caboose, not just a few cars, but you really get focused on what's happening there. You just don't have the ability to look what's going to happen 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 24 hours from now. That's what planning does. The planning section chief works a lot with operations section chief to account for resources and personnel. So there's an accountability to make sure that that's in place. In larger incidents, of course, that could be a situational unit leader, resource unit leader, or resource unit leader itself. Accountability is a big thing, and we all talk about that. It's real easy. I think Joe mentioned earlier we had a large wildland style fire that burned over a couple thousand acres of corn in a very short period of time. And the accountability of that, I can't even tell you. I think we ended up having almost 9 counties of different people there because of the size and magnitude and speed of this thing. And it was all fought off of the process of using, of course, local tractors and plows and discs and things of that nature, but there was a lot of water hauled to that incident too. So that was a big part of it. But again, looking at that again, looking to the future and being able to track those resources, like in that wildland fire process I just talked about, it was a huge task. And quite honestly, at that scenario, not having the ability to do that, and it was so large of an area, we were depending on individual engine people to have the accountability. And the report does, of course, before they left that, they had all the troops accounted for, nobody missing type thing. So that's planning section. We're going to talk more about planning and logistics a little bit later tomorrow, a little bit more detail with that, but I'm just giving you the higher level view here. When it comes to planning, of course, if an instant action plan is to be developed, the planning section chief has a key role in that. They're not only, again, looking at what's going on now, but you're thinking about the future response, and you're also thinking about the recovery. You start thinking about recovery as a planning section chief the second you get involved in a scenario or response. You have to be focused to do that. Look to the future. What's that going to look like? How are you going to get there? At smaller instances, the planning section chief may be used to determine present and future resource needs. What are you using now? What do you think you're going to need in the next couple hours, the next 4 hours, next 6 hours during this period? Can help with demobilization, help put that planning in place. So when you're ready to execute and leave, you can check the health condition of vehicles, make sure everybody's in good shape, making sure they have an accountability of when they leave here, when they return, that we're notified or somebody's notified to account for them. So we don't have anybody driving off a roadway and missing somebody that way. And the demob. So assist with compilation of necessary reporting. When you're dealing with a larger scale incident, those above you, especially when you get into the political realm, which many of us deal with that in our careers, whether it be a mayor or county board official or whatever it may be, or an administrator, they want to know what's going on. So we have to have the ability to do that reporting. Planning can help take care of that. Again, as incident commander, you don't have time to say where you're at now and where you're going in the future. Planning can help you with that role. In a complex incident, the planning section chief may be used to assist in predictive analysis. Again, looking to that future, what needs to be done, where are we at? We know what the objectives are. And in planning, we're given objectives by the incident commander at the initial response of an incident. Once those objectives are set, we focus our planning completely and entirely around what the objectives of the incident commander are. So we're not operating independent, we're operating in conjunction to help them get to the end of what their goal or vision is for the objectives, and then also looking at the next operational period to move that ball down the road and be successful at that. So that's planning section chief in a nutshell, and that's kind of where we're at with that. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Gaspersky and talk about the logistics section chief a little bit, and we'll go from there.
Okay, as we're moving through this evening, you can see we're kind of starting to expand a little bit on the instant command system and how we actually use that. And I went too far. So the logistics section chief, one of the things this person does is actually is responsible for resources and some of these other tasks. I learned probably the best lesson I could learn on logistics section chief when we deployed to New Orleans, because logistics was down there and working for us on a large incident like that. The logistics section chief was able to keep track of everything that was needed, from turnout gear that someone either got dirty or lost, all the way to ladders of different sizes and chains for chainsaws if you needed it. It was sort of like walking into a Menards with 3 different trailers that were down there, and you had everything you need. Now, do we have that same kind of situation in Illinois? And the answer is yes, we do. It's just sometimes it's not as defined on the scene as it is in some of these larger incidents. Okay, but if you're the logistics section chief, a couple key elements for you to think about are feeding and sanitation. And again, not just bringing in pizza first thing in the morning and letting it sit there and get to the point where it gets, you know, above 40 degrees and starts to have bacterial growth on it by the time you eat it. It's what can you actually do to take care of these people and bring them some food that they can use, and then providing that sanitation to also help them out in that area. Fuel and maintenance, we've all been on situations where we've had fire apparatus and other apparatus on a scene, gets to the point where it's time to fuel them. We've dealt with that. And communications, this is probably one of the biggest things that logistics can do for us on small incidents, is to try to match our communications needs with the size of the incident so we can actually make this thing work. It's getting harder and harder to communicate, as you well know, because we've got so many different platforms out there now that sometimes you actually have to be able to integrate these platforms, and not everybody has an available device in the back that can cross-band a lot of this stuff. We do in some of the state resources we could bring, but on some of these smaller incidents, sometimes you actually have to carry a couple of radios around with you, and it gets pretty cumbersome. Sometimes communications is just a matter of matching people together that have the ability to communicate to one another, so they can actually do that face-to-face and then share those messages. It's just not something where you can actually go out and just start, dialing a radio up and seeing whether it'll work. A base is a place where we have emergency responders, and a lot of times what we typically think of this in Illinois is that's our command post. It might be our staging. Okay. And logistics section chief, in a lot of cases, larger incidents, is the person that manages rehab. So that person can be utilized for that, not necessarily to provide the EMS or water or whatever, but to actually coordinate that and decide who it is that needs to be there and how you're going to make that work. On larger incidents, logistics really runs all this. They have service branch and support branch, and they actually are in charge of doing this. But larger incidents, and I say larger, but what I'm looking at is even the situation we had at Taylorville tornado, we didn't have the biggest incident in the world, but we had a lot of these units that we had to activate because we really needed them, not just in the initial phase, but as we worked through the process, where the people started coming back and we had some emergency responders on the scene, we needed to start taking a look at this. Okay. Finance and admin, everybody says, I don't need finance and admin. I don't need to bring them to the scene. But the problem is that record keeping is becoming very, very important. And I will tell you this, if you're through any kind of event and you decide at some point in time that you're going to reach out for either state or federal assistance, this person is a very valuable tool that you can have to help you keep track of a lot of these records. And if you notice, we got two different situations here. Planning section handles instant reporting. Finance and admin handles information that we're going to use to actually keep track of our costs. If we have situations where we have, compensation claims, somebody gets hurt or whatever, finance will keep track of a lot of that for us. Okay. All right, safety officer. Safety officers, we're used to that. If we deal with a hazardous material incident, we're used to having a safety officer, and we're used to having that safety officer trained to the level of the incident. But what we're starting to see, I think, in smaller incidents around the state is people are beginning to realize that you got to disengage one of those command officers or one of those captains or lieutenants and really concentrate on safety. We've seen a lot of incidents in the state where there have been injuries at a scene because something's gone wrong. And I hate to say this, but some of these injuries have been more than preventable. We've had some fatalities around the state. And when you go back and study what happened at the scene, I would say they were more than preventable because it just happens, and almost like it happens secondarily without us even knowing about it. Something happens, somebody does something at the scene, and the next thing you know, what happens is, somebody gets hurt or whatever. So it's really important for us to realize that safety has to be part of something we do. To make a safety officer, to make an incident commander a safety officer is really putting that person in a situation when the incident starts to expand. You're really putting that person in a situation where it is very difficult for them to do both of those jobs. So in the fire service, at the local fire service, if you can disengage one of those either red hats or white hats and turn that person into a safety officer, it will be a great benefit for you at the scene to actually have somebody that's kind of watching your back and seeing what's going on. I'm not saying the fire service is reckless, but what I'm saying is that there's a lot of times there's things that are going on, and things are very dramatic and things are changing, quickly. And you really almost need somebody to be able to monitor that for you so that they can give you a good, clear idea of what's going on at the scene and maybe something that we need to change. The liaison officer is someone that we use to go to governmental organizations. This is a picture of Senator Andy Minar and Senator Tammy Duckworth were actually at the Taylorville tornado. They came, we had a lot of dignitaries there. But we actually had one of our EMA people serving as the liaison officer, because you don't just talk to these two folks. What you talk to is the staffers that are going to bring them there. And there's a lot of different kinds of things you have to look at. When are they going to get there? What's the transportation like? How long do they get to stay? What do they want to do when they're there? Can we have some kind of a press conference when they're there? So the liaison officer works with a lot of those folks. And the liaison officer could also work with Red Cross, some of the other cooperating agencies that are there at the scene. At Taylorville, one of the things we had happen was we had a lot of private entities come in there. And when they came in, they brought a lot of resources. And so what we had to do is we did not put a liaison officer in it. We should have, but we didn't. So what happens was the operations section chief ended up dealing with it. And even though they might have at some point in time been part of operations, there were some of them that did things that really weren't operationally based. And what we needed to do was to put somebody in charge of that. In fact, that was one of the after action reports, is to have a liaison officer that actually we could have used to actually go and deal with these people and the VIPs that came to the scene. It was kind of a unique situation at the Taylorville tornado because we were in the middle of we had just finished an election and we were in the middle of a gubernatorial transfer. So we actually were dealing with two separate groups of folks. So there were a lot of VIPs that were there. We really needed a liaison officer. We didn't put one in there. We should have indeed put one in there. Public information officer. This is a person that we are seeing more and more and more, even at smaller incidents. We're starting to see the need for this person. And the reason we're starting to see the need for this person is the fact that information sharing has become so common in today's day and age that we typically, if we go and look at these things, if you've got something that happens in your community, you may see some things on social media that are happening at that scene before you're even getting instant reports back from your people at the scene. And you say, well, these aren't bona fide press people. But it becomes sort of a race almost to get accurate time out as quick as you can so that people have a pretty good idea of what's going on. We've used this in Nokomis extensively. We've tapped into social media. We've gotten information out to the public that they need to know about situations we've had down there, including some, instances with utilities and stuff like that. So they know what's going on. And it's amazing the number of people that actually use social media. But then in Taylorville, the other thing we dealt with too was we actually had the media folks from the area that came, and we wanted to get ahead of that. And we wanted to help them out too. We became, and we wanted to become the source of information that they went to actually get official information about what was going on at the scene. And to do that, we kind of had to get ahead of it very quickly. We did a news conference just a few hours into the event. The chief said, we don't have a lot of information. I said, no, we don't, but we need to get ahead of it. And once we got ahead of it, we sort of became that source of information. It was very beneficial for us to go and do that. The other thing is what's being put out to the public. Locally, this is easier to follow. There aren't a lot of agendas. A lot of times in this, you're just getting information put out to people, but you want to know what's being said. You want to know what's being put out. One of the things we do here at Chrismont EMA is if Greg puts out information to the media, or Kevin puts out information to the media, or I put out information to the media, we want to make sure they said, so we got a better idea of how the public perceives it. Look, when I tell you something, you have a perception about how I told you that. But what people don't understand a lot of times is communications is not the sender. Communications is the receiver, and that's personal, interpersonal communications, and that's also communications on an official basis from an official organization to the public. The receiver is the key. What do I want them to know, and what are they getting? You have to be very careful about that a lot of times, because what you do is you put out information, and you are very sure you know what's going out. And then when it goes out there, you say, well, that's not quite the way I want it to be. Well, you have to correct that. You have to go out and really, really work hard. This is a hard job. A public information officer job is very difficult, and you're going to work. But some people, like me, I love it. And so it's when we go out and we deal with this, it's a challenge to me, and I really enjoy it. Sometimes we'll have a joint information center, and we'll even have a joint information system, which is where we tie a lot of these emergency responders. This picture you see here is former Governor Rauner, who came to the scene one day after the tornado and wanted to tour the scene. And so a lot of the emergency responders, we got together, put together a couple of news releases for him, and we went out and did it. One of the things that we also want the public information officer to be able to do is to put together news releases and to put that information out to the public and use the media to do that. The media becomes the conduit. And sometimes these written statements are so very important, because that becomes the one thing that you see from the event that the news organizations actually took it word for word, put it on their platform, and sent it out. All right, so what's the need for these positions? Well, the need is based, again, on what your situation is. What's your resources? This picture here is the Illinois Incident Management Team and the flooding that occurred along the Ohio River a few years ago. The flood was coming up very rapidly. The folks in Metropolis asked for this team to go down there. The team went. The flooding was supposed to get very severe very quickly. And so what happened was a lot of the local officials had to go out and take care of their homes and their families. And so these people really ran the incident for about 2 days, because it was such that there were a lot of local things happening. The local people couldn't do both. The incident management team went down there and said, we think we can help you. And they said, okay, it's your show. So for a couple of days, they basically ran the response in that community in Southern Illinois. All right, exercise 4. What we're going to do is we're going to turn this